Hey y'all. So, a couple days ago, I was confronted with the question. Well, I was confronted with several questions actually, but it all tied back to this first one. Though the first one was, I'm paraphrasing, but it was basically, can we do good outside of God? Or so you're saying we can't do any good outside of God. I can't just be a good person. Well, that's a little complicated. Ultimately, I say no, being the short answer. But if you want the long answer, you're gonna have to stay for this video for a few more minutes. I'm sorry about that. If you would turn me to Exodus 32:1. Exodus 32:1. Now when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, the people gathered together there and said to him, Come, make us gods that shall go before us. For this man, or for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. Now, that seems like a fairly straightforward verse, but I would like to remind you that the edict from God, the command from God, saying, You shall no other God before me, hasn't been handed down yet. Moses was still up on the mountain getting the Ten Commandments. That's why he was up on the mountain, to get the commands that the people to know how to live. But, and they probably thought, oh, there's nothing wrong with this. This is a base good. They probably thought that. This all stems from needing something to worship. And the point being is that even our idea of good, whether acknowledged or not, comes from God. Even the very idea of good, even the very concept of good, even the very concept of morality. And wanting a relationship with this God, because I don't think there was any benefit from it. I mean, granted, I don't know what the people were thinking when they act during this, but as far as I could see, there was no benefit from it. This was just something that the people wanted because they recognized even pagan individuals and really godless individuals recognize their need for a relationship with something greater, recognize their need for a very basic good. And as I said, the very idea of good, the basis of morality, whether we acknowledge it or not, whether we want to say it or not, whether we actively hate it or not, it comes from being created by a divine power, from being created by God, from being created by Yahweh. That comes from that. The very idea of good comes from God. So, the long and the short answer, I say, well, yes and no. You have a very base good, which I'd argue comes from being created by God in the first place, whether acknowledged or not, but ultimately no. Now, am I saying you can be a good person that doesn't have God in the heart? Well, no, but once again, it comes back to this idea that the very basis of morality, the very basis of good on our spectrum, the very basis of good as even a concept, comes from God. Whether we, well, let me go broader. It comes from a recognition that we have someone higher than ourselves. It comes from a recognition, a need for that relationship. So, yeah, you can basically be a good person and eat in the moment without God. But if we're talking about eternal good, which honesty is the only good that matters, if we're talking about eternal good, then absolutely not. You need God. You need to foster that relationship. You need to find whatever it is that's missing, you need to find. And I guarantee you, whatever's missing, whatever you feel is missing, ultimately will turn out to be God every single time. The very concept of good comes from God. And the very concept of good comes from God because He recognized we'd be a stubborn people. You know, we are the only animals on this planet with free will, with the ability to say no to God, with the ability to betray Him. I mean, look no further than Genesis 3, the fall of man. Adam and Eve ate of the fruit, and they were eternally separated by God. They were eternally separated from God for eating that fruit because they wanted to be at God. They wanted to know the difference between good and evil when all we need to know is good. Now, the reason I say we don't need to know evil is, well, if they haven't eaten that fruit, we wouldn't know really anything else except find God. I heard a great quote from a pastor whose service I joined yesterday. God doesn't do what is right, but what God does is right. What that basically means is, I'm sure you can figure out, but what that basically means is the very idea of rightness, we may have it flipped. If we're Christian, if we're a Christ follower, we do not do what is right. But as a Christ follower, as a Christian, what we do is right because it's an outpouring of God's love for us. And it's an outpouring of the relationship. And what God does is ultimately right. Not for its own sake, but because He is God. Guys, I know this can be complicated to handle for some people. I mean, the very basis of good. And that young man did have a good question about him. He was a little young in spiritual manners. He had a good head about him, so he asked the right question. He asked the absolute right question of what is good and how can I know what is good? How can you know what is good if you were created by God, who doesn't do what is right, but everything God does is right because He is God, and He is righteous. He is utter perfection. You know, asking questions, that's another thing that separates us from the animals. But when you ask genuine questions to people who genuinely want to help you, you ask genuinely big, thought-provoking questions, that'll lead you down the path to God every time. Guys, I love you. God bless you. And I'll see you next week.